By the time police rolled up to the house on Elmwood Drive, the story had already been written. A beloved nonprofit director, a brutal home invasion, a woman who survived what no one should have to endure. By morning, Evelyn Price would be on every local news station, her bruised face a symbol of random violence in a neighborhood that prided itself on being safe. Except none of it was real. Detective Sarah Brennan stepped through the front door and into a living room that looked like it had been decorated for a magazine shoot. Soft gray couches, framed photos of Evelyn shaking hands with local politicians, a shelf lined with awards for community service and leadership, everything in its place except for the shattered glass near the back door and the blood trail leading upstairs. Evelyn sat wrapped in a blanket on the edge of the couch, paramedics checking her vitals. Her face told the story she wanted people to see. Swollen cheekbones, split lip, bruises blooming dark across her jaw and arms. Defensive wounds, the kind that came from trying to fight back. She described the attack in a voice that trembled just enough. A masked man, tall, maybe 6 feet, dark clothing. He had come through the back, demanded money, struck her when she screamed. She fought, he hit her again, then he ran when headlights swept past the front window. Brennan took notes and said nothing. She had worked cases like this before, the ones where the victim's story lined up too neatly, where every detail felt rehearsed. Upstairs, crime scene techs were already flagging problems. The back window is broken, glass scattered across the deck outside. If someone had smashed it to get in, the glass should have been inside. A jewelry box lay tipped on its side in the bedroom, contents spilled across the dresser. But the expensive pieces, the ones any thief would grab first, were still there. Custom jewelry was gone, real gold stayed. And then there was the blood. Evelyn claimed she had been on the floor when the attacker struck her from above. But the dried blood on her face told a different story. Evelyn claimed she had been knocked to the floor and pinned down, but the dark red trails on her neck ran in perfect vertical lines down to her collarbone. Physics did not lie. Gravity pulls blood down. If she had been lying on her side as she claimed, the blood would have flowed sideways across her cheek, pooling toward her ear. Vertical drips meant she had been standing upright for a long time while she bled, likely in front of a mirror. Brennan walked back downstairs and asked the question she already knew would break everything open. "Where's your husband?" Evelyn blinked, slow and confused, like the question did not make sense. "David's in Milwaukee, business trip. He left this morning." Brennan nodded. "When did you last speak to him?" "Right before it happened, maybe 20 minutes before I called you." The detective made a note, 20 minutes before the attack. Convenient timing. Perfect alibi for the husband. Perfect isolation for the wife. The digital forensics team hit gold in her cloud backup. Evelyn had deleted photos from her gallery, but she forgot about the automatic upload delay. They found 2 selfies taken 7 minutes before the 911 call. In the first photo, her lip was split, but her cheek was untouched. In the police body cam footage taken 20 minutes later, her cheek was purple and swollen. She hadn't just checked her appearance, she had critiqued it. She realized she didn't look damaged enough, so she went back to the mirror for round 2. Browser history from 2 days earlier painted an even darker picture. Searches for self-inflicted injuries, crime scene staging, how long bruises took to form. When Brennan sat down across from Evelyn later that week and laid out the evidence piece by piece, the performance cracked. The trembling stopped. The tears dried. What replaced them was something colder. "You staged this," Brennan said. Evelyn stared at her hands, then quietly, "You don't understand what was at stake." Brennan leaned back, "Then help me understand." What came next was not a confession. It was the unraveling of a decade-long pattern of destruction. And at the center of it was not just a woman who lied, it was a husband who had spent 8 years making sure she never lied about him. Because David Price had learned early what Evelyn did to men who tried to leave, and he had decided he would never give her a reason to. Evelyn Price had destroyed 3 men before she married David. The first was an attorney. When he discovered she had fabricated abuse allegations against his elderly mother and filed for divorce, Evelyn filed an emergency protective order claiming he had threatened her life. She leaked the story to his law firm. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but the partnership vote he had been promised quietly disappeared. His career survived. His reputation took years to rebuild. The second was a tech entrepreneur. when he ended their engagement after finding evidence she had manipulated his business partners against each other. Evelyn claimed he had financially abused her and frozen her out of joint accounts. Investors panicked. Funding dried up. His startup collapsed before the truth came out. The third was a surgeon. He called off their wedding after discovering she had invented a stalker to gain sympathy and social access. She filed assault charges. The hospital suspended his privileges during investigation. By the time prosecutors dropped the case, his patient load had moved to other doctors. His practice never recovered. 3 successful men, 3 public destructions, 3 identical patterns. David Price had looked. He met Evelyn at a conference where she was rebuilding her image after the surgeon debacle, positioning herself as a survivor pivoting to nonprofit work. It was compelling. David was a forensic accountant who investigated corporate fraud for a living. He knew how to spot a well-constructed lie. Early in their relationship, David did what he always did when numbers did not add up. He verified. He found the ex-husband, read the court transcripts, tracked the timeline of accusations and retractions. He located the entrepreneur, heard about the collapsed startup. He spoke to colleagues of the surgeon who remembered how quickly everything had turned. Most men would have walked away the moment they realized what she was. David made a different calculation. If he never rejected her, never became a threat, never gave her a reason to turn on him, he could survive her. More than that, he could control her. He proposed 6 months after they started dating. The marriage was not about love. It was about self-preservation. As long as he validated her, funded her image, never challenged her publicly, she had no reason to destroy him. And David was very good at validation. He praised her nonprofit work, he appeared at her events, always in the background, always supportive. He never questioned her stories, even the ones he knew were false. But he also documented everything. Recorded conversations, saved emails, tracked financial transactions, noted every lie in a password-protected file backed up in 3 locations. He called it his insurance policy, because David understood that the only way to survive a predator was to make sure destroying him would destroy her too. For 8 years, the system worked. He steered her obsessions carefully. When she fixated on a coworker who had slighted her, David suggested she channel that energy into launching a nonprofit instead. When donor attention began to fade and she started fabricating smaller incidents, threatening emails she claimed to receive, vandalism to her car she had inflicted herself, David watched, took notes, and recalculated his risk. Then an anonymous user on a local forum questioned financial discrepancies in her nonprofit. Evelyn could not identify the critic. She could not fight an enemy she could not name. Her board launched a quiet internal audit. Her funding was at risk. Her reputation, the only currency she valued, was under threat. David watched her spiral. He saw her researching self-inflicted injuries, watching forensic crime shows, asking hypothetical questions about what mistakes criminals make. He knew she was planning something. And when she asked him what time his flight to Milwaukee would leave, he told her. Then he bought the ticket. The night David left for Milwaukee, Evelyn waited until his rental car disappeared down Elmwood Drive before she began. She had planned every detail. The broken window, the scattered jewelry, the injuries that would look severe enough to be believed but controlled enough to avoid real damage. She had researched, rehearsed, timed it down to the minute. All she needed was an empty house and enough time to make it convincing. She started with the staging. Using a towel-wrapped crowbar, she broke the back window from inside, carefully scattering glass across the deck to mimic forced entry. She moved through the bedroom, pulling out dresser drawers, tipping over her jewelry box. The expensive pieces went into her pocket, costume, jewelry, and stayed scattered across the dresser, the kind of mistake a panicked burglar might make. Then came the hardest part. In the upstairs bathroom, Evelyn stood in front of the mirror and began inflicting her own injuries. A blunt object to her cheekbone, her jaw, her arms, each strike deliberate, calculated to bruise without breaking a bone. She avoided her eyes, her nose, her teeth, areas that would require hospital intervention she could not control. Twice during the process, she activated her phone's selfie camera to check her appearance. The bruising needed to look real. The blood needed to be visible. She was building a story, and every detail mattered. She didn't realize the phone was logging those camera activations and metadata that would later become evidence. She also didn't realize that when she leaned over the bathroom sink to strike her own face, blood droplets would spray upward onto the ceiling in a pattern that physics could not reconcile with her planned story. By the time she called 911, Evelyn believed she had created the perfect crime scene. Her voice shook as she described the masked intruder to the dispatcher, tall, maybe 6 feet, dark clothing. He had beaten her, demanded money, fled when headlights passed. She stayed on the line, crying softly, playing the role she had written for herself. Officers arrived within minutes. Paramedics treated her injuries. News cameras showed up before dawn. For a few hours, the story held. Then Detective Brennan started pulling threads. Crime scene techs flagged the glass direction. Security footage from a neighbor's camera showed no one approaching the house during the window Evelyn claimed the attack occurred. Phone forensics revealed the browser history from days earlier. Searches for self-inflicted injuries, crime scene staging, how long bruises took to form. And then there was the blood splatter. Forensic analysis reconstructed the blood flow. You claimed you were on the floor when he hit you. You said you couldn't get up, but the blood trails on your neck are vertical. Gravity doesn't work that way on the floor, Evelyn. You were standing up. You were watching yourself bleed. When Brennan confronted her with the evidence, Evelyn tried to adjust her story. Maybe she misremembered the sequence. Trauma distorts memory. But the forensics did not lie. The performance collapsed. Police brought David back from Milwaukee. In the interrogation room, he sat calm and composed, hands folded on the table. Brennan laid it out. You knew she was planning this. David nodded slowly. I knew she was capable of it. You were conveniently out of town. I gave her space. I thought she would realize how destructive this was and stop herself. Brennan leaned forward. Or you made sure you had an alibi while she destroyed herself. David said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, I spent 8 years making sure she never turned on me. When I saw her planning this, I realized she was finally turning on herself, so I let her. You fed the monster, Brennan said. David met her eyes. I kept the monster from eating me. Against her attorney's advice, Evelyn agreed to a televised interview from jail. She believed she could win public sympathy one more time, that if she could just explain herself to the right audience, they would understand. She had spent years controlling narratives. This would be no different. She was wrong. On camera, Evelyn unraveled. She blamed David for abandoning her. She claimed the stage assault was a cry for help, then pivoted to attacking Detective Brennan for refusing to believe women, then accused the media of bias. Her voice shifted between tears and rage, victim and aggressor, sometimes within the same sentence. The interview went viral, but viewers did not see a victim. They saw a narcissist losing control of her own story in real time. Prosecutors charged Evelyn with filing false police reports, obstruction of justice, and fraud related to her nonprofit's financial discrepancies. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Her defense argued she suffered from personality disorders that distorted her perception of reality. The prosecution presented her methodical planning, her browser history, her pattern of destroying ex-partners, and the recovered progress photos proving she had paused during the alleged attack to stage additional injuries. The jury deliberated and returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison, eligible for parole after 4. His statement was brief and cutting. You weaponized victimhood. You turned systems meant to protect the vulnerable into tools of personal vengeance, and you made it harder for every real victim who comes after you to be believed. David was not charged. Prosecutors determined he had not directly participated in staging the assault. His enablement was morally reprehensible, they said, but not criminal. In prison, Evelyn maintains a blog framing herself as a whistleblower silenced for speaking truth. She has a small following who believe she was railroaded. Prison therapists note she remains incapable of genuine accountability. Every session is another performance. David divorced her before trial. He gave one interview, clinical and detached. I saw what she was. I thought I could manage it. I was wrong. He sold the house, relocated to another state, changed his name. He lives alone now. Some view him as a survivor who barely escaped a predator. Others see him as a complicit in enabling a decade of destruction. The truth lives somewhere between those extremes. Evelyn Price destroyed lives by weaponizing sympathy, but David Price fed her obsession for 8 years, not to stop her, but to keep her aimed at anyone but him. He documented her lies, steered her targets, and when he finally saw her planning self-destruction, he bought a plane ticket and let it happen. Was he a victim who survived through the only means available, or was he an accomplice who let a dangerous woman terrorize others as long as his own safety was guaranteed? The law answered one question: Evelyn was guilty. But it could not answer the other. Who created the monster? The woman who needed to destroy, or the man who taught her she could? If this story left you unsettled, hit that like button. It helps more people find these twisted tales. Subscribe to Wicket Crime Stories for dark, realistic crime stories that blur the line between fiction and nightmare. We drop new cases every week. Thanks for watching. Stay wicked.